can also come from these other sources of minerals. Mr. President, on the strength of this, I won't take too much of your time. I commend you once again for the leadership you've shown in this budgetary exercise. I am confident that you're going to be giving a big legacy to President Muhammadu Buhari, because this will be the first time since 1999 that we'll be going back to the January to December budget cycle. Thanks to you and thanks to our colleagues. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, DSP. Senator Mohamed Sani Musa.
Thank you, Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues. I'm Mohamed Sani Musa, representing Niger East Senatorial District. From the 2020 proposed appropriation bill, my observation is on the VAT, value added tax. It is a very wise decision of the federal government.
Point of order, leader.
Rise to draw the attention of the chair and our distinguished colleagues to Order 16 and move the motion for the Senate to extend debate, beyond the stipulated time. I so move.
Minority Leader.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I rise to second the motion that we do extend our time for sitting for today so that we can accommodate further debate on the 2020 appropriation bill. I so second.
Distinguished colleagues, those in favor of the motion say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Continue, please. You have 2 minutes more to go.
I've not started, sir. It's on the VAT. It is a wise decision of the federal government to increase VAT from 5 to 7.5%. This will augment revenue that will be able to handle those areas, those programs that the federal government have set out to do, especially in the health and the infrastructure sectors. But the increase is not going to be a problem if other physical activities are enhanced. If you look at it today, the informal sector is one area that will contribute so much to our revenue drive. But there is no database on that. We don't actually know the number of people that operate within that sector for us to be able to project how much VAT will be able to get from there. Without doing this, it is going to erode the minimum wage increase, the advantages or the happiness that Nigerian workers are on the minimum wage, for the increment of the minimum wage. So if we actually want to control the inflation rate, we should also be able to allow we should be able to allow workers to spend more instead of saving, because the VAT now will create a situation whereby everybody wants to save instead of spending. So I think there is need for federal government to push the FIRS to start, both the FIRS and state governments, to start taking census of informal sectors of the economy. Secondly, again, the VAT rates today, if you look at it, even if increased to 7.5%, is still lower than even those countries that have low income. If you look at Lesotho, you look at Senegal, you will see that they are charging close to between 15, 20, and 18%, which is higher than what we are doing here in Nigeria. So I think the increase to 7.5 is okay, but we need to tighten all avenues that will not allow us to get maximum revenue or maximum intake from those that are supposed to pay their tax. And then tax evasion. Today we don't have data of companies and individuals that refuse to pay taxes. And FIRS knows most of these companies. There is need for federal government to do something about it so that tax evasion will also be reduced in order to maintain that inflation rate that the federal government has been able to achieve at this moment. Thank you very much.
Senator Tolu Odebi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I remain Tolu Odebi from Ogun West. Mr. President, let me first of all commend the President for the timely presentation of the budget proposal. And also let me thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership in guiding this Senate to pass the MTEF expeditiously, and also guiding us to make sure that we revert back to the budget cycle from January to December. Mr. President, permit me to also congratulate my colleagues who have contributed eloquently to this debate. Mr. President, going by the budget proposal, let me first of all say that a budget of 10.3 trillion for the size of our economy and population is not particularly worrisome. I think the budget is in line. I mean, for the size of this economy, as a matter of fact, if revenue was not an issue, I think it's something that we can even, despite all the challenges we have, it's something that could have even gone higher. But going by the assumptions, Mr. President, I'd like to pick out some few things. I think oil price at 57 is ideal, even looking by the statement that was made out by the finance minister today that oil prices are dropped because of the glut. I think that's agreeable. I think if you look at the output, 2.18, I did a cursory look at what has happened over the last 3, 4, 5 years. I think we've always run a negative variance about in our production target, about 40% negative variance in terms of what we budgeted and what we actual. So we just have to make sure that we achieve this target. Also looking at the 305 that is being used, I think we are cutting ourselves short here. I think we need to rebase that 305 because I think if you use the 360, which is the actual value, I think the government can also realize some income from there. The 2.98% GDP, I think is a bit optimistic. I think if you also look at the global economy, I think only recently, I think the World Bank even downgraded the expected GDP of Nigeria to be about 2%, and I think they believe that the global economy is slowing down and commodity prices are falling. So these are some assumptions that we have used, which I believe that we need to be very careful. We could fall short of these revenue projections and could further make our situations unattainable. But I'm looking at the overall spread of the budget. One of the things that caught my eye, Mr. President, is that if you look at the non-debt recurring expenditure and you look at our debt service, added together, that makes about 70% of the whole 10.3, leaving us less than only 3% for capital expenditure. For a country it's estimated we have 98 million people in poverty, about 45 or 35 people are unemployed. We are growing at a rate of 2.7% growth rate. So when you look at a huge deficit capital, when you look at what we are spending in terms of capital expenditure, is very, very, very small in order to get us out of this poverty. One of the things that going into expenditure, one of the areas that I feel that the government needs to seriously start looking at is in the area of capital projects. I honestly believe that government needs to start looking at liberalizing that market and bringing more of the private sector in to assist. Because if you look at the quantum of capital projects that needs to be handled or done now, it's very huge, and I'm not sure the federal government itself can do that. I don't see why the federal government should be involved in rail, for instance. I mean, I think that could have been opened up and to get investors to come in and do the rail for us. I mean, if you remember, even in America in the early days, the Rockefellers were the ones that started the rail. I think even some of the roads are some of the areas that also we can look at. But going into the revenue area, I think the VAT of 7.5, on the look of it, doesn't seem excessive. But my concern is that in a shrinking economy, when you are tightly increasing, when you're supposed to be infusing more money and reducing taxes to ginger the economy, we are going to be raising taxes, and also we don't have enough money that we are spending to stimulate the economy. That's an area that I'm also concerned about. I think the marine sector, there's a lot of money that can still be made in the marine sector. I think the production sharing contract is still an area that we've just passed this morning. I think stamp duty is an area that we also talked about that we need to focus on for revenue. Subsidy, if you look at from 2006 till now, we've spent close to 10 trillion naira on subsidy. That's an area that we need to reduce to make sure to put that money into more productive sectors of the economy. And I still believe that the government needs to do some kind of asset re-engineering. I think there's still a lot of federal government assets that are wasting, that we need to shrink and get more revenue. So there's still quite a lot of things here, but Mr. President, because of time, I yield the floor.
Thank you very much. Senator Barinada Mpigi.
Thank you, Mr. President of the Senate. I remain Mpigi Barinada. I represent the people of Rivers Southeast Senatorial Zone. I'm from Rivers State. Mr. President, my area of concern in this 2020 appropriation bill we just received from the President is the area of infrastructure, Mr. President. The agencies of government involved in developmental projects, there are a lot of duplications. Mr. President, let me take for instance, which sums of money are being released every year. And if you look at Federal Ministry of Works, if you look at the state government, if you look at FEMA, if you look at NDDC, if you even look at Ministry of Niger Delta, Mr. President, most of these agencies are engaging themselves in almost the same projects in some areas. Let me take, for instance, a street in Port Harcourt that was commissioned by the governor of Rivers State. That same street, after 2 weeks of commissioning, Mr. President, the next signpost I saw was NDDC, and the next day we see FEMA. All these agencies, somehow, they just engage in duplication, are claiming this project because these things are not at all filtered. Mr. President, it is of my humble opinion and suggestion that the agencies of government engaged or participating in developmental projects should, as a matter of fact, meet accordingly, especially the Appropriation Committee and the Budget Office, to filter out all kind of identified projects that Ministry A or Agencies A is being handled. If we can do that, these agencies will be able to identify that A is handling so project and B is handling so project. Because these funds are being drawn accordingly from the same statutory allocation. Mr. President, if we handle that, it will help this very good intent and good intention of Mr. President, especially in budget drawing. Because if you look, like the figure in Ministry of Works, about 262 billion, 82 billion for water resources, 81 billion for Niger Delta Development Commission, and 24 billion from Niger Delta Affairs. Mr. President, most of these funds at a time can be earmarked and be put into areas of priority. But because most of these budgets are being handled differently without identifying what A and B should do is also affecting. Mr. President, one of the areas that I want to also talk about is this January to December budgeting. As you see clearly, the budget before us, the figure for NDDC is also indicated here. Mr. President, the budget for NDDC for 2018 is not yet before us. 2019, they've not even talked about. But by the time the budget of NDDC will come, almost all these agencies that government has mentioned about our projects have been done by the federal government, it will still repeat in NDDC's budget. Mr. President, such things must have to take place so that all the agencies that are drawing from the same statutory allocation should have the same timeline for budget implementation. Mr. President, I want to thank you for allowing me to speak on this. Thank you.
Senator Comrade Abba Patrick Moro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleagues, I remain Comrade Patrick Abba Moro, the senator representing the good people of the Benue South Senatorial District. Mr. President, let me start by commending the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for his timely submission of the budget as desired by the Senate. Mr. President, I equally want to thank you for drawing up a timetable that will make us revert to a budget cycle of January-December, which is ideal for the implementation of our programs and policies. Mr. President, the 2020 budget presents an opportunity for us to rise up to the challenge of being properly called senators of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. It means that we must brace up to the challenge of effectively representing our people by bringing out a budget that is in tune with the reality of our times and the challenges facing us as a nation. But, Mr. President, I must state here that beyond that, we have a huge challenge before us. If you go by the proposals in the 2020 budget, the signs are not very good. Mr. President, from what we know now, the budget allocation for Works Ministry is about 157 billion naira. Mr. President, as I'm talking to you now, Ministry of Works has unpaid certificates of over 300 billion naira. Mr. President, it takes about 125 million naira to construct a road in this country today. And so if you look at that provision, therefore, vis-a-vis what is required of the Ministry of Works, Mr. President, I think it's just a drop in the ocean. Mr. President, our security presents a very serious challenge to us as a nation today. Mr. President, going by the proposals in the 2020 budget, I think we need a serious re-examination and rethinking, especially given the challenge of insecurity that faces us today. Mr. President, it takes the Air Force or the Army, for instance, 3 months to import equipment to replace even broken down ones. Yet, for the whole of 2019, Mr. President, no capital allocation was released to our security agencies, especially the Army and the Air Force. In that regard, Mr. President, depending only on operational expenditure is certainly not good for us if we want to lay a foundation that can contain and secure this country for us from insurgents. Mr. President, I think that what we require in that regard, coupled with other deficient budget proposals that I have identified here, like in education, Mr. President, this year, our allocation to education is just 0.5% of the total budget. And against the backdrop of the UNESCO requirement of 26%, Mr. President, I think we need a lot of thinking in funding our education. Mr. President, as I'm talking to you, right now, Nigeria has 43 federal universities, 104 federal polytechnics. And so if we take it like that, Mr. President, it means that we have not yet started addressing the problem of education in this country. Well, Mr. President, I am told that I have only 1 minute, but I want to summarize this. That if we have to implement a budget that is realistic and addresses the problem of this country, then we need to rejig this budget. But, Mr. President, we need to re-engineer our policy trust. Otherwise, we may not make the difference that we have promised to make in the beginning. Mr. President, don't forget, you are aware as well as I am, that irrespective of party platform, our people elected us here to give them good government, to be able to deliver the dividends of democracy at their doorsteps. They did not vote for us for failure in this place. And therefore, Mr. President, we must summon the courage to give out a budget bill that Mr. President will sign into an act that will address the basic problems that this country faces today. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Samebu.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sam Ewu is my name. I represent Ebonyi North Senatorial District. Mr. President, let me join others in appreciating you in trying to move the budget cycle again from January to December. On the budget proposal, as presented by Mr. President, I want to make these few observations. Revenue is the basis for a successful budget. All the grammar we are speaking here, if we don't have money come into our revenue, we can't make any meaningful expenditure. Revenue will still be under-implemented. Now, the assumption on this 2020 budget is that we're going to produce 2.18 million barrels of oil per day. Yet, Mr. President, in his presentation, told us that our oil revenue was short by 49%, almost 50% in 2019 budget. The government proposed 2.3 million barrels, but they got 1.8 million barrels last 2019. And yet again in 2020, they've gone ahead to project 2.1 million barrels per day. Mr. President, I was thinking that for us to be realistic, let us, at best, we could have based our proposal on the figure we got last year, the actual we got last year. So that even if we go beyond that, it becomes an additional than projecting high and then not meeting that target, thereby having another shortfall, which will make nonsense of our projections. So I was thinking that this revenue coming in would have based it on realistic what has been happening. We all know that we have not been able to know the amount of barrels of oil we produce every year. A lot of thefts, a lot of bunkering. Even the international oil companies are not truthful with us. So for us to be realistic, we could have based it on the actual we are sure of producing, so that we don't go back to this failure. Mr. President, on capital expenditure, we were also told by Mr. President that there was a decrease, or rather in 2020, this year, we have an increase in the budget proposal, and yet in the capital expenditure there is a decrease by 23%, not taking into cognizance our infrastructural deficit. So I was thinking that now that we have increased our budget, we could also increase the amount we are going to spend on capital projects so that we'll be able to bridge that gap. Well, on VAT exemption, I want to thank Mr. President that at least VAT will no longer cover some basic agricultural produce. because this is the area that affects our farmers, the masters of this country, for exempting such items as bread, cereals, fish, flour, fruits, nuts, and vegetables from VAT. At least the hardship will be minimal on the masses that use this agriculture, and also encourage our farmers who will be producing this. So on this note, I want to thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Bayo Oshuno, Senator Said Al-Kali, Senator Teslim Folarin.
Thank you, Mr. President, my highly respected colleagues. Mr. President, my name remains Teslim Folarin, representing Oyo Central. Mr. President, I, like most Nigerians, welcome the 2020 budget proposal, and would also like to congratulate you for your commitment in bringing the budget cycle from January to December. Mr. President, I looked at the budget and I want to commend Mr. President for his policies that led to 9 consecutive quarters of GDP growth, steady decrease in inflation, increase in foreign reserve, increase in foreign capital, and many other economic highlights. Also, Mr. President, I'd like to commend Mr. President Commander-in-Chief for his efforts to diversify the economy. Mr. President, a lot has been said on the dwindling revenue, the hole in this year's fiscal year, which is likely to snowball into next year's fiscal year. A lot also has been said about the increase in VAT. But I want to focus, Mr. President, on the issue of growth in population, which is growing disproportionately to our economy. Mr. President, our population has grown from 45.2 million at independence to over 200 million. Now, this figure, Mr. President, may be much higher given our poor record of data collection. Mr. President, uncontrolled population explosions no doubt puts a lot of strain on existing structure. So you can't, there will always be pressure whether we like it or not, Mr. President. And if you have a population of 200 million and it's a skilled and productive one, then there is no problem. But the truth is, they're not. So the issue now, Mr. President, for me is how do we skill this population? And we can't do that. We might as well begin a conversation on how to slow things down. I don't know what to do, but I think it's something we must start thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Shaibu Isano, Senator Rocha Sokorocha.
Mr. President, let me just join others to add my voice on this very topical issue. The good news is that there's a cordial working relationship now between the executive and the legislature. Kudos to you. Congratulations for this wonderful relationship, which will also positively affect the budget which we're about to pass. But, Mr. President, the whole thing that we're talking about is about income and expenditure, money, and what to do with money. The expenditure or the problem of the country is far bigger than the money that we're expecting. And unfortunately, our money comes from only one source, which is called the oil. And which means if there are crises anywhere in other part of the world, our country will smile. But if there's peace in the world, the Gulf area, then we're worried. We must accept this notorious fact that we do not have enough resources, money, to fund the budget and to meet the needs of the people, the yearning needs of Nigerians. And confession of poverty and ignorance is not a disgrace to any nation. And nothing done positively to correct it is yet a disgrace. So we must come to terms with the fact that we don't have enough resources to do this. The biggest economic problem we have is how to use the smallest amount of resources to achieve the maximum objective. That's what makes an economist and differentiates him from an accountant. Our budget seems to be tailored like an accountant perspective, which is a budget for just buying and selling and returns and expenditures. I think we'll begin to look at our budget as wealth set aside for the production of further wealth. What I mean by this, and to simply say that government is business, the situation we find ourselves calls for that we should look at those areas that will produce more resources into our land to meet up with the future expenditures. But the way we are going about it, and that brings me by simple economic terms of scale of relative preference. This is what we're not practicing in this budget. Take, for instance, Mr. President, I would have expected that we should change the narrative by not allowing debt services and the currency go up over 81%, 79%, or 71% of the total money. What that means is that we're only keeping for generations yet unborn 20%, and we are consuming 80%. It's either we hate our children yet unborn, or we're not ready to face this fact. That brought me to the issue when I said there's need to cut down on the cost of governance, and that created a big hullabaloo. Luckily enough, Italian legislators did that to save €1 billion. But that's also applicable to executive, ministers, everybody. We need to share our weight to be able to accommodate the ordinary person in the street. What we need to do, I've seen the amount of money budgeted for works, money budgeted for different distance. The only two key areas which touches on the nerves of our economy is the education and health, which are called the social infrastructures. This must be exempted from our budgetary system and given a special place. They will come to the rest and begin to prioritize only on those subheads or departments that can ensure bringing in more resources into our coffers to be able to run the affairs of this country. So I call for prioritization. You did mention, and you announced Rochas Okrocha as the chairman of tourism and culture. And tourism is expected to create jobs and bring more money into the system. But I'm sure in this budget, the amount of money budgeted for tourism to kick off might be infinitesimal compared to what we expect. So how will tourism flourish? Or those other sectors that help the economy? Another painful thing.
You have to round up now.
Our problem, again, is that if you go around the nook and cranny of this country, everywhere in this country, and you see any smoke coming out of any roof, it's not a smoke of production, it's a smoke of consumption. It's either ishewu or jollof rice or kunu. And if you go to China and see films coming out, they're producing wealth. So it is embarrassing to our nation for our youth to be sitting down, either chewing sugarcane or joint. You
can round up now, please.
And there's no production. So, Mr. President, stand up to say, let this budget be retailored to support the productive sector of our economy based on technology, and that will be the way to go. God bless Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Degi Eremio, Senator Oriolowo Aderele Adeyemi, Senator Abuchari.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. My name is Abubakar Kyari, Senator representing Borno North. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, much has been said about the 2020 budget, and I would like to align myself with those positive things that were said. However, I would like to deal, because of the paucity of time, I would like to deal with those areas that have concerned me directly or my constituency. Mr. President, as we are all aware, much of Borno North is inundated with insecurity. Even though the type of hit and run tactics of the insurgents have not completely downgraded the situation, but they have dealt a big blow. And there's a huge humanitarian crisis waiting to unfold. Right now, as we're talking, there is no single primary school that is open in the whole of my constituency. No single secondary school operating in my constituency because of the insurgency. Much has been talking about giving education, tourism, other projects. But when I see what has been provided for insecurity, I see a meager amount, one for 100 billion, I think, for the operations, the whole army operations that is based on Operation Lafia Dole and all other operations in the northwest and in the Niger Delta and the north central. I believe that amount is too meager. 100 billion naira translates to probably about $13 million. Where are the amount of money that will be used to purchase the equipment and the arms needed to carry out these operations? Right now, we have major projects that Mr. President is interested in, especially the recharge of the Lake Chad. I wonder how the recharge of that Lake Chad will be done without adequately taking care of the security of that area. The other big major project is the Great Green Wall. My two local governments in my senatorial zones are the ones in the frontier of the Great Green Wall. That is Mobar local government and Abadam local government for Borno State. And it's that place, particularly those two areas along the border of Nigeria and along the riverbank of Komodugu Yobe is a no-go area at all. My village, Gashigar, sits on that river. I have not been to that village in the past 5 years. And nobody would now here tell me that can go today to that village. So, Mr. President, I would like to sincerely plead with the executive to beef up. Thank you, sir. I'd like to sincerely plead with this Senate to increase the money for the insecurity, to fight the insurgents. The other aspect is the Northeast Development Commission provision. I've been talking with the chairman of the Special Duties Committee, and nobody knows on what basis that the executive have arrived at 37 billion. 37 billion, $10 million. Like my colleague, Senator Dube, has said, so far foreign donors have contributed $560 million. And here we are, $10 million for rehabilitation and reconstruction of damaged communities spanning all the Northeast, not even in one state, not even in one senatorial zone, in the whole of the Northeast. I believe this is grossly inadequate, and I think we need to have our priorities right. And I'm sorry, if I know that there are scarce resources and everybody is looking for those scarce resources, but with insecurity, once we do not have security, I think all what we are doing it won't fly. Then another thing is, I think there are areas where we can beef up the revenue. Nobody has given us the unspent revenue from 2019. We have heard of cutting down the capital budget of 2019. That is by stunting the budget itself. Budget is supposed to last till 2020, but it's now being stunted to December 2019. So what happens to the unspent revenue of the 2019? Are we going to roll it over in addition to what we are going to realize in 2020 between January and December? These are the questions that need to be asked. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Abubakar Tambwal, Senator Danju Mala, Senator Abdullah Adamu, Senator Tanko Al-Makura, Senator Sabo Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleagues, my name is Sabo Mohammed, representing Jigawa Southwest. Mr. President, so much has been said about this budget estimate. And the fact is, the Constitution says the President will lay before us an estimate. It will be our duty to appropriate and subsequently to oversight. Now, Mr. President, that's a lot of responsibility. My prayer here in trying to appropriate is to look at 4 key sectors. The first issue, Mr. President, is for government to hands off most of these capital projects, like those that concerns railway and roads. Government should be able to engage the private sector in private partnership, especially on these railways, and bundle the sector and the roads, sell them off, put the toll gates, generate revenue. This is done all over the world. But here we go to Chinese bank and Chinese government and borrow money to construct railway. Why don't we give the Chinese the right of way, let them construct the railway, charge what they have to charge, and at the end of the day, it remains the property of the government. We should not have government doing most of these businesses. That is number one. Number two, Mr. President, is the issue of power. Without power, there is no way you can run industries all over the world. And year in, year out, we will keep complaining of power generation, power distribution. And bundle this sector completely. Let us have a private partnership so that government would now have less responsibility in funding. Now, after power, Mr. President, we need to look at agriculture. It's a fact that 70% of employment is generated in the agricultural sector. There's no doubt about it. But despite that fact, still, over 70% of our land, of arable land in Nigeria, is cultivated. And here we are in 2019 budget, the government giving agricultural sector maybe about 81 billion. Mr. President, 81 billion, the American government subsidizes agricultural sector in America 5 times that much every day. The subsidy on agriculture alone is $1 billion a day. That's 355 billion naira. And here we are in a country of over 200 million. And with the amount of employment agricultural sector is generating, we are giving them a meager allocation of 80 billion plus. I think this Senate needs to look into that and needs to do something about that. Finally, Mr. President, the financial sector. All these issues are spoken about, whether it is agriculture or power. Power is for industries to be able to strive and produce. Because without production, forget it. We can sit down here and talk about budget year in, year out. We'll still be the same where we are. Next year, we'll still be the same, if not, backwards. Mr. President, the financial sector, we need to sit down after having a roadmap, agriculture and industries, to get the financial sector to be subservient to these 2 institutions. What I mean by that, if you want to establish an industry, you can quickly access facilities from the bank and establish it. If you want to go into agriculture, you can access long-term facilities, not short-term. Because the problem with our banks is they only want to give you short-term loan. And there is no way you can run an industry on a short-term facility, or you can go into agriculture on a short-term facility. You need long-term facility to be able to do that. And at the moment, Mr. President, it's unfortunate that most of our banks now, not only they do not recognize collateral from certain parts of the country, they are even specific. Before they give you loan, you have to have collateral in Abuja or Lagos. Check it anywhere. That is what is happening in our banks. The only bank one can run to is Bank of Industry, which is a government bank, which is there to help industries. The same Bank of Industry, if you approach them, they will tell you to go to a commercial bank and get bank guarantee. What does that mean? It means they are not ready to take responsibility. They are not going to bear the risk. How can you get bank guarantee from that commercial bank, move to Bank of Industry to access loans? So the whole policy, the whole issue, Mr. President, needs to be looked at critically. And I hope and believe that this Senate, under your leadership, can do something different. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Senator Josh Ambassi, Senator Zeki Ademka.
Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, I am Hezekiah Ayuba Dimka, representing the good people of Plateau Central. In the first place, let me commend Mr. President for a timely presentation of the budget, Mr. President. And I am believing that under your leadership, Mr. President, we're going to act fast too, to be sure that this budget is passed. In doing that, Mr. President, let me acknowledge and appreciate all my colleagues for the presentation they've made with regards to the budget. They've spoken a lot, and I don't want to take much of time, but I have very, very important and critical issue I want to present, Mr. President. It has to do with drug abuse in this country. We've been talking of crime all the way. But we should know that this crime, the origin of most crime, like kidnapping, we're talking of Boko Haram, we're talking of robbery, we're talking of killing here and there, all these things, most of them initiated from drug abuse. Mr. President, it might interest you to know that in the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, Nigeria alone has 14.3 million persons that are they're into drug abuse. And if we look at that, Mr. President, there's need for us to check properly to know what is happening, what's the cause of that. Because, guys, the reason is that if you look at NDLE, for instance, look at their institution, look at their welfare, their arms and ammunitions are obsolete. Some were bought almost about 10 years or 20 years ago. Their vehicles are written off. Go to their offices, there's nothing. I'm pleading, Mr. President, that something should be done because the funding there is completely not adequate. When you talk of their promotions, some of them have been there for almost 10, 15 years on the same rank. These are people that they are dealing with drug barons. People that are having money into billions. For instance, if that person is arrested, for goodness sake, and that person, because the NDL personnel, because of his not being, properly taken care of, and he might be tempted, Mr. President, to compromise. And that's why I'm saying that that area should be looked into properly. Their funding is very, very inadequate, Mr. President. I went further to the institution in Jos. I look at that, their training institution. It's completely, in shambles, Mr. President. That's why I'm pleading with my colleagues to see that we put hands on deck to be sure that something good is done for NDLA. Another thing that should be noted is that you discover that the penalty for these drug barons, I don't think it's what, I mean, it's compared to what's happened in other countries. Some are sentenced to death, some are given very high, but here, somebody was arrested before you know, the man is either released on bail or he is nowhere to be found. Only God knows, but I think these are things that should be checked, Mr. President. With that, Mr. President, I say thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a word.
Thank you very much, distinguished Dimka. Senator Oleleka Mustafa.
Thank you. Thank God. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Olalekan Mustafa, Ogun East. Let me join my colleagues in commending Mr. President for bringing this budget of sustaining growth and job creation, not only by title, but also in content. The budget, if properly implemented, will improve the economic standings of the small and middle-level businesses. I also want to talk about the increase in the VAT from 5% to 7.5%. Even though people might complain that it is a bit high, one can take solace in the fact that the effects of this increase will not be felt mostly by the downtrodden, because items that are majorly consumed by the people are not part of the items that are vatable, and mostly that they are also not part of the items that the increment in VAT will affect, like food items like fish, bread, wheat, yam, and all other things, which makes it commendable. It's also good that between the states and the local government, they share 85% of VAT collected in the country. And we all know that in the last few years, local governments have been completely crippled by the states. And if they are able to share part of this new increase, I hope they will be able to put them into judicial use, and then we'll be able to feel the existence of all these our local governments. I want to align with my colleagues who have suggested that government should embrace PPP. I believe that is the only way to go, because that is what obtains in most parts of the world. Our revenue is dwindling every day, and if we embrace PPP, all the funds that have been directed in constructing roads, providing infrastructures, can be freed for other social services like education, the health sectors, and other areas that are lacking. There are quite a number of roads in the country that are very viable if they are concessioned to private investors. But because people have the penchant of always finding a way to award contracts, that is why they have been misdirecting or misadvising the government from going the way of PPP. And the only way we can help them as a Senate is to have a brand new law that will guide the PPP, because a lot of people, a lot of investors shy away from coming into Nigeria to invest in infrastructure because the laws are very weak. If we have a very strong law that will guarantee that the goalposts will not be shifted in the middle of the game, a lot of private investors will definitely come into the country to invest their money. Apart from roads, when did I start? Apart from roads, if you look at the marine sector, marine transportation is virtually dead in Nigeria. Because except maybe for Lagos, where they have the marine transport sector, and most of the ones that they do there, they are privatized operations.
If the federal government can embrace the same, there are, at least in the riverine part of the country, you can always take a boat from Lagos either to Port Harcourt or to Delta State or Calabar or wherever. But because it is not being encouraged, I hope, Mr. President, that if we have the privilege of having a law that can guide the PPP operations in the country, it will help our people. It will help our people in freeing a lot of money from that has been spent on infrastructures and other things to be diverted to the social services like medicals, health, and education. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before I tell the Chief Whip, the Minority Whip and his deputy, let me ask if there is anybody here who wants to contribute. Senator Abalai, do you want to make any contribution? You're welcome back.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wanted to restrain myself from talking about the contents of the budget because I have read just 3/4 of what was presented to the Senate in my absence because I was away, as you are aware, on an assignment. But I think 3 things strike the 2020 budget. One is the misunderstanding that the VAT, increase in VAT, will affect the welfare of the less privileged Nigerians. And I have read carefully. The way it is carefully inserted in the budget is so that it will tax the rich in such a manner that it will assist the poor. And I think that is the vote all over the world. So those who are criticizing the increment of VAT from 5% to 7.5% should know that the consumption pattern in this country does not favor the less privileged. And therefore, if that VAT is increased, it is not going to cut down consumption because these are things that well-to-do Nigerians are used to. But that from their comfort of having to enjoy what they are used to enjoying, they should equally make way for the downtrodden to have a share of it. Mr. President, all over the world, if you are giving a land, for example, in Abuja, to build a factory, certain percentage of the cost of that building is allocated as an obligation upon you to build small houses for the poor. So we just have to learn to take care of ourselves. And I think the insertion of that in the budget will go a long way in redirecting our thinking to continue to be our brothers' keepers, or even become more of our brothers' keepers than we are used to. Then generally the structure of the budget. Mr. President, I think there will be the need, and a very serious need, for federal government to have a relook at the way we budget in this country. And the way to do it, Mr. President, and I think which has been done all over the world, is to begin to softly redirect the financial structure of this country in such a way that every citizen of this country will benefit from what government does with its budget. I laugh when I hear people say we are suffering because the federal government is. There is no way the federal government can touch the life of downtrodden people in a manner outside the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Mr. President, it is the intention of the framers of our Constitution that government will be taken nearer to the people, and it dictated the creation of states and local government. I have never heard of any day that the federal government withheld the allocation of states or that of local government. So for anybody to expect that federal government will leave here and go to my local government to touch the life of people, I think he does not understand the structure of this Constitution. What federal government is vested with the responsibility of doing under the Constitution is to build roads, to provide services. These services are not directly applicable to people in the village. It is the work of the governors and the local government chairman to direct the resources of the country that are shared in the manner in which the Constitution dictated for the benefit of their people. That is the only way that we can have this. Well, and I think this is where the thinking of government should be. We must, as a Senate, begin to think of how we can closely watch the operations of states and local government if we must impact positively on the lives of our people. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, distinguished Chief Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I'll be the timekeeper.
3 minutes remaining.
I'll be the timekeeper.
Why are you people disturbing me? Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity. I have to congratulate you for getting back another of our colleagues, for getting back our budget from December to December, that's entering January. All my colleagues have beautiful comments, beautiful things they have said. My concern was nearly what Senator Sabo was saying. You know, the industrial output is very low. And it's very low because if you don't have a good output, you are not going to have if you don't have a great input, you are not going to have a great output. So manufacturers' capacity utilization has also been very low in the manufacturing area. Manufacturing has gone. If governments are saying that they want to leave oil, we need to invest more in subsidy in the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing sector will bring back the life wire to the economy, because manufacturing and agriculture have not been given a very good position in this budget. I think from the immediate place I came from to come to this Senate, I believe that agriculture and manufacturing has a lot of role to play. And we have downplayed these sectors because of the input. We're supposed to be giving subsidy, general subsidy, to manufacturers and agricultural people. Like you will see that people, we can do all our milks in Nigeria by our cows, because you can see that this agricultural sector needs a direct investment by private sector and government, by government giving subsidy, whether in cash, whether in taxes, whether in area of they are manufacturing. Another thing you will look at, Mr. President, is that we have put in a lot of time in this budget. I have never seen the government. In fact, I live opposite the villa. I have never seen president being awake like this president. Because I come home, I drive out, I come back at 1 a.m. There are still cars in front of my house planning for this budget. So this budget must not fail by any way. We must make sure that Nigerian people, what does government really need in this budget? Most importantly is security. The next is light. So government did not provide enough money to security, light, that power. When I said light, I don't see enough money in those things. The commercialization they did before is not a real commercialization, honestly, because it's not going to help this economy. Because people who are rightly handling the power, the contracts with them should be reviewed and let them be more serious. Because if government really want to talk about this economy, from power.
Chief, I will be the timekeeper.
Distracting me. So I think necessarily what the economy needs, one, is adequate security for people to go about their businesses. Secondly, talking about the industrial input and output is very, very important, because we are not manufacturing enough if we want to compete with NAFTA. If we are really going to use the opportunity the African countries are going to bring to we have not started. So we need to organize our organized private sector, that's the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria. They need to be taken into confidence. They need to sit with government, provide solutions on how we are going to move. Also, the Nigerian Economic Summit should be sat with. They should be also a partner in this business. Government should. I know we have almost done this year's budget. Subsequent budget, government should do a lot.
You can round up, Chief Whip.
They should be able. I have not even done 3 minutes, Mr. President. You are very unfair to me. You are very, very, very unfair.
Those who come to equity should come with clean hands.
You are not even. So, I think generally that in general terms, the budget is a very good, there's no paper that will be most perfect, and there's no paper that will be worst, I say, but it's the way this Senate look at the budget compassionately. That is where it's going to be. So, Mr. President, I believe that tourism and other things should take front row in our economy, because we are not even touched tourism. Tourism can be more than oil. Agriculture can be more than oil. Oil will not be here in the next 15 years. There will be no oil. So we better start planning for today to do our agriculture and put it into manufacturing. If we don't do that, we are not going to be in a very good standing with our general principle of the budget. I also look at...
Chief Whip, please, you have to round up now. Yeah, you have to round up.
I think we have to put back the capital projects in front, because the capital project, like the last speaker, Senator Naba is talking, how will our people benefit from this budget? They will benefit not by the recurrence being more than the capital project. We have to put more money in the capital project, because that is the only way we can be able to check security, check the roads, check the power, and all the rest of them. So I believe, Mr. President, my colleagues have said everything we needed to say. I don't need to say much. I want to thank you for the opportunity and thank the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for standing by the Senate that this budget reversal will come from December to December. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Minority, will you want to speak? Chief Whip, please.
Well, Mr. President, I'm very happy that I'm speaking after him, so we'll see how he is going to keep the time. But, Mr. President, my name is Philip Tanimu Aduda, FCT Senate. Mr. President, I would have really come down on this budget, because for me, I believe it's a budget, do I call it like the minority leader had said, taxation, or because looking at VAT 7.5. But my good friend Balai Binala said it was a misconception, and so I'm going to meet with him so he can give me a little bit of an education on it, so that I will be on the same page. Having said that, Mr. President, let me congratulate you for reordering and rearranging the budget to have a 12-month life cycle where it can start from January to December. I indeed admire your dexterity and your push, and then also putting the presidency on the same page. And today we have this budget here. I sincerely hope that by the grace of God Almighty, as we have set timelines, we'll be able to work on those timelines and ensure passage. Having said that, Mr. President, let me also congratulate you on the move to ensure that we pass this deep onshore, offshore inland basin production sharing contract act, the Amendment Act. Indeed, hope is not lost. We're beginning to look at various places and various places where there have been leakages to ensure that we bring in the required revenue to fund our budget. Mr. President, if this had happened since 2003, I'm sure only God knows where we would have been by today, but God knows why, and today you are here, you are the Senate President, and with your thinking, and then today the President also sent in a letter where he too was talking about this amendment, and by the grace of God we are moving in on it, and today we have passed it for third reading. Mr. President, having said all this, the budgetary provision for the FCT is 25 billion. Yes, Mr. President, there are two budgets for the FCT. There's the national priority budget, and then there's the statutory appropriation bill for the FCT. The national priority budget has been a budget that was used to develop the city center and indeed the FCT. Mr. President, this budget from probably 150 billion to 100 billion to 50 billion, and today we're talking about 25 billion. Mr. President, it is alarming and very worrisome because 25 billion cannot service the national priority project for the FCT. And I think that somebody needs to, and the chairman of the committee needs to know this seriously, because the Federal Secretariat will go there today. The lifts are no more working, and they are property of the FCT, and they are supposed to be working. And it is from the national priority budget and project that the places like the Eagle Square, places like the Federal Secretariat are supposed to be renovated, are supposed to be worked upon. Even the National Assembly, Mr. President, even this National Assembly, that is where the money that is required for either renovation or repairs that is supposed to come from. So, Mr. President, and the monies that FCT is owing various contractors over 300 billion. So if you are budgeting 25 billion, what are they going to do with it? And you will not expect them to use the statutory allocation, which is for payment of salaries, overhead, recurrent, and other capital projects for the satellite towns in the FCT. So, Mr. President, mine is for us to look at this budget and then with the FCT committee to see how we can better the national priority project budget so that we can have more provision to be able to take care of the various infrastructural deficits in the FCT. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. The Deputy Minority Whip, Senator Zahabi Alajiao.
Thank you, Mr. President. Like my colleagues that spoke before me, I would want to use the opportunity to thank you for initiating the reversal of our budget cycle from January to December. So also I would want to congratulate Mr. President for heeding to this initiative from the National Assembly. Mr. President, I would have wanted to hit hard on this increase in VAT because it affects the people that send us to represent them here. But before I could do that, my distinguished brother Bala Ibn Allah contributed to settle me down. But all the same, I felt I should remind Ibn Allah that the rich of this country have their own way of throwing back their overheads to the downtrodden. It has always happened and it will still continue to happen if nothing is done to protect them or to continue to protect them. Mr. President, another issue I would want to discuss has to do with the deficit between the officially allocated OPEC quota to the quota that has been based to project this budget. The disparity is about 30-something%, and it has been happening year in year. If we should continue this way, Mr. President, I don't think we are likely to get out of the problems this country is facing economically. So I think it would be better if we will start to think and limit ourselves within our earnings for us to be able to get things right. One striking issue about this budget is the completion of uncompleted projects. Yes, it's a noble idea, and I commend Mr. President for this, because it will not only take away the ugly sides of these uncompleted structures, but it will also reduce the cost of variations of these projects that will mount up to a debt bill of this country. Mr. President, much has been said. I'm left with almost nothing other than to emphasize, and I have done the emphasis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, distinguished Deputy Minority Whip. Distinguished colleagues, we have come to the end of the debate on the general principles of the 2020 appropriation bill presented by Mr. President to the joint session of the National Assembly. And let me take this opportunity to thank all our colleagues who have contributed and even those who did not contribute. This is our first budget in the 9th Senate, the 9th National Assembly. And the second reading of this bill, the debate provided an opportunity for all those who wanted to contribute to the debate to speak what they feel about the appropriation bill before us. All the comments, I'm sure, were well meant. The general idea is to have a budget that is going to be operable, that is going to be useful to the people of Nigeria. So I want to thank everyone, but let me also mention that one thing that is of greatest challenge to this budget and probably subsequent budgets, if not properly handled, will be the generation and collection of revenues. Today we are seriously challenged in the area of generated revenues. And it appears that until something drastic and well-sustained and focused would be done, this lack of revenues or shortage of it will continue to militate against the implementation of this budget and the subsequent budgets. So we have to up our game as legislators. We have to continuously engage with the revenue generating agencies. I believe that we will schedule quarterly evaluation to be handled by our relevant committees, particularly the Committee of the Senate on Finance, to continue to discuss with these revenue generating agencies every quarter. And in fact, we should come up with a schedule between now and the end of next year, so that every revenue generating agency knows in the first quarter of next year when it will appear to make presentation on its collection, its successes, its challenges, and what we need to do as legislators to make them do better, or if the challenge is administration, what the executive needs to do. I also believe that we need to look at how we can enhance the capital allocation. The shortage of funds will militate against that. We have serious challenge when only 30% is devoted for capital budget. But that is an improvement over what we inherited from 2014, when the allocation in the budget of 2014 was actually 15%, between 14 and 15%. But that is not to say that we will not do better. We have to continuously work on this, and there is always this criticism on this appropriation bill that so much is going to the recurrent. Yes, why not? When we have people to pay for. We have so many agencies of government that are there, over 600 of them, getting to 700, and they have managements and staff. Even though some of them may not be doing anything, we still pay. Probably we need to be looking at how we can streamline the agencies That is not to say that we lay off people, but we must establish the functionality, the usefulness of these agencies where they are not providing the kind of services that they might have been set up for in the first instance. We streamline them so that we reduce the burden. Otherwise, this huge sum that is going to service the recurrent will continue, and that leaves us with necessity to look for more funds to beef up the capital allocation that appears to be suffering. Some of our colleagues, and many indeed, mentioned that we also need to look at the direction of public-private partnership, especially in the main or physical infrastructure like roads, like rails, and so on. I agree completely with this. We can concession our roads, especially those that may be viable, 50 years, even 100 years. Instead of taking money from China, like one of our colleagues said, give the road to them. Let them come and construct it. Let them take the toll. After 50 years, we get back our road without spending a dime. So I think there is need for us to start thinking, because government is not about the executive. We are part of government, and we should be able to share our ideas, our visions with the other side of government. And let's see if together we can do something that will bring some relief on our pulse. I believe that we need to do a lot more in the area of creating and sustaining employment for our youth. The social intervention program is a stopgap arrangement. We need to create an environment where our youth will be able to get some jobs to do. We have a very vibrant youth. More than 65% of the population today is youthful. Last week, the first ever smartphone manufacturing company in Africa was established and opened in Rwanda. All the people who will be doing the work to produce the smartphone, not assembly, producing, manufacturing, are Rwandan youth. We have to think deep. This economy has to be knowledge-based. We have to reform our education sector because it doesn't work. Someone will obtain a degree out of a university and yet he can hardly give you one paragraph of any meaningful or correct sentence or something that can be useful. So we need to look at what we are teaching in our schools. The time has changed when we'll be teaching our children and pupils and students what we were taught 40, 50 years ago. Time has changed. Our challenges are different today. I believe that we need to look at that. And when we come to diversification of our economy, many of our colleagues have signified the necessity of going agricultural and solid minerals. Agriculture, most of our people live in the rural areas. The accounts will tell you 70%. What that means is we have to do everything possible to make agricultural sector profitable and attractive. And there are a lot of business people here. When last year or the year before last, the Federal Minister of Finance at that time decided to take the tariff from 15% to 5% on imported powdered milk. That was a disastrous financial decision because it will discourage local production of milk. We have the animals, we have the cows, we have other animals, livestock in Nigeria. We should have well-designed and thought out plans on how to deal with our livestock if what we have will not give us the kind of results and outcomes that we need for dairy production. We can crossbreed our animals, or we can even import animals that we feel can do what we need to stop importing meat and other dairy products. But these things can easily be said. I don't want to say they can easily not be done. With determination, we can make things change. Let's push it. Let's engage the executive. Our Committee on Agriculture should be able to task the Federal Minister of Agriculture. We should insist that the Federal Minister of Agriculture should come out with a roadmap, a plan of what they want to do to change the current environment of our agricultural sector for the better in the next 4 years. We should insist on that, and we have distinguished senators who have worked in that sector, like the Deputy Chief Whip, Senator Sabi Aliu, and practicing farmers like the Chairman, Senate Committee on Agriculture, Senator Dr. Abdullah Adamu himself, and even Senator Balana Allah. I don't know why your farm is, but I was told you are also part of it. So we need to really insist that we want to see the programs, the projections. Where can we provide legislation that will enable those improvements that we seek? The solid minerals, I had a discussion with the chairman of the Committee on Solid Minerals, Senator Omar Tanko Al-Mokura. He is already engaging the ministry, the minister, to ensure that we have a roadmap. If it requires legislation to improve what we have, we should do so. But we have to discourage people from engaging in this artisanal mining. Nigeria loses quite a lot. The biggest problem many of us express their views about will be the security of the country. The essence of any government, they say the purpose is to provide security and welfare for the people. We cannot, in any sense, unrealistically attract even domestic investments in any sector without security. Talk less of foreign direct investment into our country. So we are supposed to look at the security architecture. The funds, yes, the funds may not be enough, but how do we make the best use of what is not enough? How do we ensure prudence? How do we ensure efficiency? How do we ensure value for money when our security agencies are given the funds? We need to be really very alert, because even though it may not be enough, but when properly applied, I think we can achieve some desirable outcomes. So with time, some of these structures have to be changed. But before we change them, we have to ensure that whatever little funds we have, that such funds are put into use. Our soldiers and other security agencies, especially those personnel who are at the war front, who are daily exposed to all the dangers, need to be properly remunerated. If they have allowances, their allowances must be given to them at the right time, because these are motivations, these are incentives that we owe them. And I believe that at the end of the day, we should be able to get more funds for our security agencies. Finally, let me congratulate all of us once again, but also congratulate Mr. President for really playing along with the National Assembly. This is the first time when a president will announce that none of his ministers or any head of any agency should travel out of this country at this time without defending his or her budget. And even when you have his approval, he said, you must go for a validation. I think this is the highest level of cooperation that we ever in this National Assembly since 1999 when we came to the National Assembly. But the ball is now in our court. We have consciously all the time mentioned we want to pass this budget before the end of December, before we go on Christmas break. We insisted they must present the budget proposal by the end of September. They presented the first week of October, which is not very bad, and for a start, that is very encouraging. Now, it is our time to prove that determination that we have shown at the beginning of ensuring that we provide every possible support for projects for Nigerians, that we are able to actualize it and practicalize it by passing the budget before the end of Christmas, before the end of December when we go for Christmas. Our committees have already started taking the defense from the MDS. And some of the committees are working together with committees of the House. And these are great signs that we are likely to even meet the target before the end of December. But I want to encourage all of us that our committees are able to finish the budget defense by the end of this month, that is, to be precise, the 29th of this month, of October. And I want to emphasize again that any minister or head of agency who does not come to defend the budget of his or her ministry or agency before 29th of October would have no reason to come to the National Assembly for defense, because the window will be shut and our committee will take the appropriate action, and that will be very patriotically done. And of course, for our committees, we have set ourselves the target of 30th of October to the 5th of November for all subcommittees of the appropriation to defend their budgets before the Senate Committee on Appropriations. So 5th of November is a terminal date for us. We want to ensure that our Committee on Appropriation works with the Committee on Appropriations of the House within the 6th of November to the 21st or so to harmonize and produce the budget document for us to be laid here before us at the end of November by the grace of God. I want to sincerely thank all of us, and of course I will not conclude this comment without making reference to those agencies that don't bring their budgets to the National Assembly in time. One of our colleagues mentioned the NDDC 2018 budget has not been brought here. I'm not sure about that. The 2019 has not been brought. Now it's 2020. The warning to the NDDC is, if you don't bring your 2020 budget proposal in time, you won't have money to spend anymore, because you cannot be spending government funds without appropriation. Appropriation is the responsibility of the National Assembly, the legislature, and we are not going to allow our responsibility to slip through our fingers. So it's the same thing for NCC, it's the same thing for FCT, and any other agency that has not sent its budget. The budget defense that we undertake at this time will be holistic. It's not we do for ministries in October and we do for others outside of October. It's going to be within October for all of them. With that, I want to assure all of us here that we'll continue to, as people given this trust, to remain steadfast, and we'll do those things that will make Nigeria better. With this, let me put the question for the second reading of the bill. Those in favor that this bill be now read a second time, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it. Clerk.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, a bill for an act to authorize the issue from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation the total sum of 10 trillion 330 billion 416 million 607,347 naira only, of which 556 billion 700 million 827,235 naira only is for statutory transfers. 2 trillion 748 billion 598 million 930,000 naira only is for debt service. 4 trillion 880 billion 309 million 549,778 naira only is for recurring non-debt expenditure, while the sum of 2 trillion 144 billion 807 million 300,334 naira only is for contribution to the Development Fund for capital expenditure for the year ending on the 31st day of December 2020, second reading.
Clerk. A bill for an act to authorize the issue from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation the total sum of 10 trillion 330 billion 416 million 607,347 naira only, of which 556,700,827,235 naira only is for statutory transfers. 2,748,598,930,000. I take that again. 2,748,598,930,000 only naira only is for debt service. 4,880,309,549,778 naira only is for recurrent non-debt expenditure, while the sum of 2,144,807,300,334 naira only is for contribution to the development fund for capital expenditure for the year ending on the 31st day of December 2020, second reading, and the bill is referred to the Committee on Appropriation and to report back in 2 weeks. Announcement. Letter from Mr. President. Distinguished Senator Ibrahim Lawan, President of the Senate. Dear Distinguished Senate President, Finance Bill 2019 for passage into law to enact fiscal measures supporting the 2020 budget. Pursuant to sections 58 and 59 of Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999 as amended, I hereby forward Finance Bill 2019 for passage into law by the Senate. The Finance Bill 2019 proposes incremental but necessary changes to Nigeria's tax and fiscal laws to ensure the optimal funding of the 2020 budget. Specifically, the bill has 5 strategic objectives, viz. A. Promoting fiscal equity by mitigating instances of regressive taxation. B. Reforming domestic tax laws to align with global best practices. C. Introducing tax incentives for investments in infrastructure and capital markets. D. Supporting small businesses in line with the ongoing ease of doing business reforms. And E. Raising revenues for government by various fiscal measures, including a proposed increase in the rate of value-added tax from 5% to 7.5%. 3. While I trust that the bill will be expeditiously considered by the distinguished Senate, please accept, Mr. Senate President, the assurances of my highest consideration. Yours sincerely, Muhammadu Buhari. Announcement. Meeting of Committee on Appropriations with Subcommittee Chairman on Appropriations. This is to inform all chairmen of appropriations subcommittees that the rescheduled meeting of the Senate Committee on Appropriations will hold today, 15th October 2019, immediately after plenary at meeting room 224, Senate Building. Signed, Senator Barrow Jibrin, Chairman, Senate Committee on Appropriations. Distinguished colleagues, will now adjourn for 30 minutes to allow the Senate return and approve the voice and proceedings for all these things, beautiful things that we have done, to be taken to the appropriate authorities. So with this, we'll adjourn till 4 p.m. That's we'll come back after about 30 minutes. Senate is hereby adjourned.